Inside America's Boardrooms, the informational show for board members and corporate secretaries. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, Donnelly Financial Solutions, and the Society for Corporate Governance.
Welcome to this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, the CEO of Boardroom Resources and the founder and editor-at-large of Corporate Board Member Magazine, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the show. Today we're going to be talking about how companies should respond to investor stewardship principles. And joining me is someone who obviously those principles touch their lives. Please welcome back Darla Stuckey, who's the president and CEO at Society for Corporate Governance. Welcome, Darla.
Thanks, TK. It's always a pleasure.
So, last year we had, in 2016, we had the Common Sense Governance Principles, and that was a group of companies and investors. Some of the investors are also in the ISG.
Right.
But we had them come together, come out with these common sense principles. Not a whole lot to argue with, in the sense of what they were. But it never seemed to get any real traction, after the excitement of the initial announcement and Warren Buffett being part of the group and the big companies, JP Morgan, et cetera.
Right.
So that sort of fades away a little bit, and now we had the announcement in 2017 of the Investor Stewardship Group,
right,
which includes a U.S. and some European or international companies, investors, representing about $20 trillion.
I don't know how many zeros that is. Yeah.
And the normal investors, BlackRock, Vanguard, CalSTRS, State Street. If you go through the list, those are certainly some of the largest investors in the world. But now they've created a set of principles not only for companies and how companies should be reacting, but also for institutional investors, So they said that this was going to be effective in January. I think it's the 18th. I'm not sure why that date is significant, but the 18th of January. So my question to you, as somebody that has to live in this world, is how substantive are these principles going to be, and are these things that will in fact have traction?
Well, thanks, TK. It's an excellent question, an excellent topic, and timely. I think this group, when you went back to 2016, but even before, there have been efforts to have governance codes in this country. There have also been people like the Conference Board. I think they did a series of framework for corporate governance. There's law firms that do it too. A lot of people are trying to do it. This group is different to me. It's larger. Was done by the institutional investor community as a group. Think about it too. These are competitors, in their day-to-day world, but they've decided to come together to try to push governance forward in the way that they think is the best. And I think their principles are not that, it's a framework. They're not that much different than what we've seen. So, you're right, there's not a lot to argue with. But this group has a lot of clout. These are the best governance thinkers, I think, from the institutional side. So, and the fact that they have put out a set of principles not only for companies but for their own stewardship, it seems very fair and even-handed. And I think that the corporate community, when we first heard about this, we looked at it with the same thing, sort of, well, we already do this. A lot of us already do all these things. This is right. This is what we think corporate governance should be as well. But it's a little different to have a group sign on to something that says we're going to be accountable to our beneficial owners, and we're going to, engage with you in a fair manner. We're going to deal with our conflicts of interest. We're going to explain, how we vote and why we vote the way we do. And then we have expectations of you. So I think it's actually a very positive exercise. If we can't really get to a code, this is the next best thing, this framework. And it's very flexible. There's substance beneath each one of the 6 points. One share, one vote is something that's been hot, diversity, pay, these things are all sort of, the substance is all there. Again, flexible enough that it's not a one size fits all. It's also important to think about what this means for the institutional investors that use proxy advisory firms. You know, they've now put upon themselves an obligation to make sure that they are overseeing that relationship properly. And that's, of course, good news to corporations. So I don't know if I've answered your questions. I know you want to know what boards should do about these. I think that, you know, boards should certainly know what these are and be familiar with them. There's no particular mechanism on the website or anything for corporate boards to sign on to this, but I think they should be comfortable in saying we support these and we're trying to, you know, abide by them all. And I'm guessing that the way that, you know, these principles might come up would be perhaps in engagements. You know, if a board member or a corporate secretary or general counsel is in an engagement and they hear the ISG, you know, we're part of the investor stewardship group, and we expect you to abide by these principles. I would hope that the boards and the people in the room would know what they are and say yes. You know, we largely agree. We agree with the framework. We agree with principles-based approach. There may be some small things that we don't actually do like everybody else, but we're working on it. We believe in this. So I don't know that anything particular is going to happen in January. There's going to be a flood of corporations doing anything or boards, but I think that in the last year, you know, people have talked to their nom and gov committees and their boards about these principles, and so I think it's mostly all positive. I mean, I'd be hard pressed to come up with a negative thing about it, other than it might just slide into the ether of specifics that, you know, individual investors are coming at companies for, you know.
Well, next week we're going to have in one of the institutional investors that is part of the group. So that's a great question for them to ask them what are their expectations.
Right.
You know, relative to that. But, you know, you're absolutely right in that the only people that this really touches in a way that's not comfortable are the outliers. I mean, most of the companies, this stuff is standard operating procedures. Okay, there's nothing in here that all those boards haven't thought about already or that aren't operating.
Right.
So that part of it, you know, that's I guess why one of the good questions is it going to have traction if it's not embraced in some other way, or if it's not asked to be a disclosure, or if you're right that it's only going to come up in conversations and shareholder engagements and stuff. We'll have to see.
Yeah, I can't say that I know exactly everything that they're doing with it, so don't quote me on that.
Yeah. So one of the things that's interesting that I did want to ask you about is one of the more aggressive organizations that we hear a lot about is the New York City pension funds. They've been certainly active in the proxy access. They've been successful in going down 75 a year, you know, getting people knowledgeable about that. They've recently announced that they're going to handle the same way of engagement on diversity, okay, on doing that.
Boardroom Accountability Project 2.0, I believe is what they call that. Yep.
Yeah. So, and that certainly has support from all investors. BlackRock and Vanguard have been very expressive about diversity and what they're going to do. So, again, that's nothing new, but there are people that aren't part of this. You know, I just wonder, from your perspective, does that hurt the cause? Does that mean that you're not going to have everybody in lockstep? Or can you have everybody in lockstep?
Yeah, I think it's very hard to herd cats. You know that, Casey. I mean, I think it would be amazing, you know, to have everybody in one group, and I don't think they'll ever get there. But I think the clout of this group and the people that are already in it, and the people that have added, you know, since the beginning, I guess a few people have been added, or a few institutions have added, you know, agreed. I think it's a very impressive group representing a large, you know, a diverse type. It's not only asset managers, it's asset owners. It's, you know, the value acts and the triends. You've got an activist, and you've got, you know, a value act, which is akin to an activist, but not really an activist, you know, as well as the CalSTRS and the Vanguards and the BlackRocks and then some of the state funds that are very prominent. And again, I go back to they put a stake in the ground. They've said, here's how we think we should organize ourselves in terms of governance and pressing governance forward. not in our day-to-day business world necessarily, because we're all fighting for assets and, we all want to manage everyone's money. But I think it's an important thing. And I think it's okay if they don't get everybody. I mean, they should declare victory and,
Yeah.
And New York City is, they are kind of, as they're an outlier in terms of they're pushing the envelope sort of harder and faster maybe than others would. So it doesn't surprise me that that they're not in the group right now. But who knows? I mean, maybe they're thinking about it. I have no idea. I don't want to misspeak, but their boardroom accountability project, as you said, is quite well. They've been very successful with proxy access. So if they are as equally successful with this, it will really change behavior. I think that, again, when the corporate community first read that document, the reaction was probably not what they would have hoped for.
Yeah.
And I won't say what it was, but some of it seems very granular. Some of it's the race and ethnicity, well, gender and race they want, by name. We're still struggling with that. And corporations, there are some board members that don't want to be identified in a particular way. Gender seems a little easier than race or ethnicity, but even so, and the idea of the matrix and putting X's in boxes, sometimes that doesn't really work. It doesn't show the true picture. So some companies would blanch from that. Like, why do you want to see the matrix now? Yeah, you should describe the qualifications, but there are some problems with it. But again, they're putting a stake in the ground, I think, way out here and trying to move people forward. And I don't think anybody would argue that you perform better when you have a diverse group of people making decisions. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
And boardrooms should be diverse and as many ways as they can be.
Well, you see some companies including pictures in their proxies now.
And we said that years ago. Just put, why don't we just require everybody to put pictures in? And then some people say, well, if they're black and white, if they're color, and then you get the color proxies are expensive, and you can't tell from a black and white. I mean, please, it gets down into the weeds, but.
Well, we have some stuff to look forward to then, and we might have to have you back to do a recap once we find out after January 18th and we see sort of what the reaction is both by the investors and by the companies.
Right.
But again, I think this touches a relatively small few because most people are operating.
Most people are operating
right.
this, but they should be aware that they are and take credit for that. And I do think that it's important for the interaction between the institutional investors and their proxy advisory firms, and hopeful that maybe something good comes out of that down the road.
Yeah, Darla Stuckey, thanks for taking the time to join me here.
Thank you.
And that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for Inside America's Boardrooms. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, Donnelly Financial Solutions, and the Society for Corporate Governance.